The morning sun painted the crystal towers of Zephyr Prime in shades of gold and silver. Princess Vera stood on her balcony watching her husband Ben work in the royal gardens below. His brown hair caught the light as he bent over rows of earth flowers he had planted months ago. To anyone watching, he looked like a simple gardener, not the husband of the most powerful princess in the Zephyrian Empire. Vera smiled at the sight. Ben had been on Zephyr Prime for 2 years now, ever since their wedding ceremony that had shocked the entire galaxy. A Zephyrian princess marrying a human from a small backwater planet had been the scandal of the century. Even now, the court nobles still whispered about her choice behind closed doors. "Princess Vera," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see her personal assistant, Neela, standing in the doorway. The young Zephyrian's blue skin shimmered nervously in the morning light. "Your brother Prince Kael requests your presence in the main hall. The morning council session is about to begin." Vera nodded and took one last look at Ben. He was now watering the roses with careful attention, his movements calm and measured. Everything about her husband was calm and measured. In a court full of ambitious nobles and scheming politicians, Ben stood out for his complete lack of interest in power or status. The main hall of the palace was a magnificent sight. Tall columns of living crystal supported a dome that showed the stars above Zephyr Prime in real time. Representatives from across the Zephyrian Empire sat in floating chairs arranged in a perfect circle. At the center sat Prince Kael, Vera's older brother and heir to the throne. Vera took her seat next to Kael just as Ben entered the hall. He walked quietly to his designated chair, which was positioned slightly behind Vera's as befitted his status as a consort rather than a full member of the royal family. Several nobles turned to watch him with barely hidden amusement. "Now that we are all present," Kael announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "we may begin today's session. Admiral Zex will provide an update on our expansion into the outer territories." Admiral Zex, a tall Zephyrian with the traditional military markings on his forehead, stood and activated a holographic display. The image showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with various colored regions marking different empires and territories. "Your Highness," Admiral Zex began, "our forces have successfully established colonies in 17 new systems this month. Resistance has been minimal. Most of the species we have encountered have been quite primitive. The humans in particular have offered little resistance to our expansion." Vera felt Ben shift slightly in his chair behind her, but when she glanced back, his face showed no emotion. He simply continued to listen with the same quiet attention he gave to everything. "Excellent," Prince Kael said with satisfaction. "It seems these humans are as weak as our report suggested. Perhaps we should accelerate our expansion into their territory." "If I may, Your Highness," one of the court advisors spoke up. He was an elderly Zephyrian named Council Member Dex, known for his sharp tongue and sharper political mind. "I find it curious that Princess Vera chose to marry one of these creatures. Surely there were more suitable matches among our own people or even the other advanced species." An uncomfortable silence fell over the hall. Vera felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but before she could respond, Prince Kael laughed. "Oh, come now, Dex," Kael said with a wave of his hand. "We all know my sister has always had a soft spot for lost causes. Remember when she wanted to keep that injured space whale as a pet? At least her human is housebroken and knows how to tend a garden." More laughter rippled through the hall. Vera clenched her fists, anger building in her chest. Behind her, Ben remained perfectly still and quiet. "Besides," Kael continued, "it is rather amusing to have a human around. They are such curious creatures. Tell me, Ben, what do you think of our expansion into your people's territory?" All eyes turned to Ben. He looked up from his hands with those calm brown eyes and spoke in his soft voice. "I think every species deserves the chance to grow and learn, Your Highness. The universe is large enough for everyone." "How diplomatic," Council Member Dex said with obvious sarcasm. "And what about your own species? Do you not care that they are being absorbed into our empire?" Ben was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was even softer than before. I care about all life, Council Member Dex. Human, Zephyrian, or otherwise. I believe that in time, all species find their proper place in the galaxy. Their proper place, Admiral Zex repeated with amusement. I suppose for humans, that place is as servants and farmers in our empire. They certainly lack the intelligence for anything more advanced. Vera watched Ben's face carefully, but she saw no anger or hurt in his expression. If anything, he looked almost sad, though she could not understand why. Perhaps, Ben said simply, then returned his attention to his hands. The council session continued for another hour, covering trade agreements, military deployments, and various administrative matters. Through it all, Ben sat quietly, occasionally asking simple questions but mostly just listening. When the session ended, he stood and bowed politely to Prince Kale. "Thank you for allowing me to attend, Your Highness," Ben said. "If you will excuse me, I should return to the gardens. The afternoon watering cannot wait." Several nobles chuckled as Ben left the hall. Vera felt a mixture of love and frustration as she watched her husband go. She loved his gentle nature and kind heart, but sometimes she wished he would defend himself when others mocked him. Later that afternoon, Vera found Ben in the gardens as expected. He was sitting on a stone bench, watching a small fountain he had installed near the earth flowers. The sound of running water mixed with the gentle hum of hover traffic in the distance. "Do they bother you?" Vera asked as she sat beside him. "The things they say in court." Ben looked at her with a small smile. "What things?" "You know what things. The jokes, the insults, the way they treat you like a pet." "Oh, those things." Ben turned back to watch the fountain. "No, they do not bother me. Words are just words, Vera. What matters is what people do, not what they say." Vera studied her husband's profile. Even after 2 years of marriage, she sometimes felt like she barely knew him. He had arrived on Zephyr Prime as part of a small diplomatic mission from Earth. While the other humans had been nervous and overwhelmed by the grandeur of the Zephyrian court, Ben had seemed completely at peace. He had asked thoughtful questions about Zephyrian culture and history, and had shown genuine interest in their art and philosophy. When Vera had announced her intention to marry him, the entire court had been shocked. A princess of the empire marrying a human was unprecedented. Her father, the emperor, had initially forbidden it. But Ben had requested a private audience with the emperor, and after that meeting, all objections had mysteriously disappeared. To this day, neither Ben nor her father would tell her what they had discussed. "Ben," Vera said carefully, "sometimes I feel like there are things you do not tell me. Important things." He looked at her with those deep brown eyes. "What kinds of things?" "I do not know. That is the problem. Sometimes you seem so much older than you look. When you are talking to my father about our marriage, or when you listen to the council sessions, I see something in your eyes that seems ancient." Ben reached over and took her hand gently. His skin was warm and slightly rough from his garden work. "I am exactly who I appear to be, Vera. A man who loves you very much and enjoys growing flowers." Before Vera could respond, an urgent alarm began sounding throughout the palace. The clear, melodic tone meant only one thing, an emergency of the highest level. Both Ben and Vera stood immediately. "We should return to the palace," Vera said. "This could be an attack." They hurried through the gardens and into the main palace. Guards were running through the corridors, and Vera could hear Prince Kale's voice echoing from the command center. They made their way there quickly, joining a crowd of nobles and military officers gathered around a massive holographic display. Admiral Zex stood at the center of the chaos, his face pale with shock. "Your Highness," he was saying to Prince Kale, "our deep space monitors have detected massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. The readings are unlike anything in our databases." "Show me," Prince Kale commanded. The holographic display shifted to show the outer edge of the Zephyr system. At first, Vera saw nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then Admiral Zex adjusted the display, and she gasped. Ships were emerging from what appeared to be tears in space itself. But these were not ships like anything she had ever seen. They seemed to be made of darkness and starlight, constantly shifting and changing shape. Even through the holographic display, they radiated a sense of wrongness that made Vera's skin crawl. "How many?" Prince Kale asked, his voice tight with concern. "We count at least 50 large vessels, Your Highness, with hundreds of smaller craft. But the numbers keep changing. They seem to phase in and out of our reality." "Any communication attempts?" "Yes, Your Highness. We have tried all standard protocols. They are not responding." As if summoned by his words, the holographic display suddenly changed. The image of the mysterious fleet was replaced by something that made several people in the command center step backward. A figure appeared in the display, but calling it a figure was generous. It seemed to be made of pure shadow, with points of light that might have been stars floating where its eyes should be. When it spoke, its voice sounded like the death of suns. "People of this system," the entity said, "you have harbored something that does not belong to you. We have come to reclaim what is ours. Surrender all sentient species for examination, and your worlds will be spared. Resist, and be consumed by the void." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. "What did it mean?" Prince Kale asked. "What are we harboring?" "I do not know, Your Highness," Admiral Zex replied. "But I recommend we mobilize the fleet immediately. These entities, whatever they are, clearly represent a significant threat." "Agreed. Send out the call to all ships. Full military mobilization." Vera watched the activity around her with growing fear. The Zephyrian Empire had the most powerful military in the galaxy. Their ships used technology that most species could barely comprehend. But something about these shadow entities filled her with dread. She looked around for Ben and found him standing at the edge of the crowd, staring at the holographic display with an expression she had never seen before. For the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely worried. Over the next several hours, the palace became a center of frantic military activity. Reports came in from across the Empire as the Zephyrian fleet assembled to face this new threat. The shadow ships, which the military had begun calling void wraiths, remained at the edge of the system, seemingly waiting for something. Vera found herself in the war room with Prince Kale and the senior military commanders. Ben had been asked to leave, as the discussions involved classified military information. She watched through the room's windows as he returned to the gardens, apparently unconcerned by the crisis developing around them. "Admiral Zex," Prince Kale said, "what is the status of our fleet?" "We have assembled over 300 ships, Your Highness. The finest vessels in the Empire. Our weapons should be more than capable of dealing with these entities, whatever they are." "Good. How long before we can engage?" "The fleet is in position now, Your Highness. We await your orders." Prince Kale looked around the room at his advisors. Council Member Dex nodded grimly. "We must show strength, Your Highness. These creatures cannot be allowed to think they can make demands of the Zephyrian Empire." "I agree," Prince Kale said. "Admiral Zex, you are authorized to engage the enemy. Drive them from our system." "Yes, Your Highness." The battle began within minutes. Through the command center's displays, Vera watched as the pride of the Zephyrian fleet advanced toward the void wraiths. The Empire's ships were magnificent, their crystal hulls gleaming in the light of Zephyr's sun. Their weapon systems were the most advanced in the galaxy, capable of destroying entire planets. The engagement started well. The Zephyrian ships opened fire with their primary weapons, sending beams of pure energy toward the shadow vessels. Several of the smaller void wraith craft seemed to dissolve under the assault. But then something impossible happened. The larger shadow ships began to move in ways that defied physics. They folded space around themselves, appearing and disappearing across the battlefield. Their own weapons, beams of absolute darkness, began tearing through the Zephyrian fleet's shields as if they were made of paper. "Report," Prince Kael demanded. "Your Highness," Admiral Zex's voice came through the communication system, strained with disbelief. "Our weapons are having minimal effect. These entities appear to be composed of some form of dark matter we cannot fully analyze. And their weapons are unlike anything we have encountered. We are taking heavy casualties." On the display, Vera watched in horror as Zephyrian ships began to disappear, consumed by expanding spheres of absolute nothingness. The Empire's most powerful vessels, ships that had conquered dozens of worlds, were being destroyed with ease. "Retreat," Prince Kael ordered. "Pull the fleet back." But it was too late. The Void Wraiths had somehow surrounded the Zephyrian fleet using their impossible space-folding technology. One by one, the Empire's ships vanished into darkness. Of the 300 vessels that had engaged the enemy, fewer than 50 made it back to the defensive positions around Zephyr Prime. The command center was in chaos. Officers ran back and forth, shouting reports and trying to coordinate the surviving ships. The holographic displays showed the Void Wraith fleet advancing steadily toward the planet. "Your Highness," Admiral Zex reported, his voice hollow with defeat, "our remaining ships cannot stop their advance. They will reach the planet within hours." Prince Kael stood frozen, staring at the display. The greatest military force in the galaxy had been crushed in less than an hour by entities they did not understand. "Evacuate the palace," he said finally. "Prepare the royal transport. We will retreat to the outer colonies and reorganize our forces there." "No," Vera said suddenly. Every head in the room turned to look at her. "We cannot abandon our people. There must be another way." "What other way?" Prince Kael demanded. "You saw what happened to our fleet. These creatures are beyond our ability to fight." Vera thought of Ben, working calmly in the gardens while chaos erupted around him. "I need to find my husband," she said. "Perhaps he has an idea." Several nobles looked at her with disbelief. Council member Dex shook his head. "Princess Vera, with all respect, what could a human possibly know about fighting entities like these?" But Vera was already leaving the command center, running through the palace corridors toward the residential quarters. She found their rooms empty and hurried to the gardens. There, sitting on the same stone bench where they had talked earlier, was Ben. He was perfectly still, his eyes closed, as if meditating. "Ben!" Vera called as she ran to him. "Ben, we need to leave. The enemy ships will be here soon." Ben opened his eyes and looked at her. For a moment, she thought she saw something vast and ancient looking back at her from his familiar brown eyes. "They have come for me, haven't they?" he said quietly. The simple question hit Vera like a physical blow. "What do you mean? How could you possibly know that?" Ben stood up slowly, his movement still calm and measured despite the emergency alarm sounding throughout the palace. "Vera, there are things about me that I have not told you. Things I hoped I would never have to tell you." "What things?" "Ben, what are you talking about?" Before he could answer, a new alarm began sounding. This one was different from the others, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the very structure of the palace itself. It was the final warning alarm, used only when enemy forces were about to make planetfall. Ben looked up at the sky, where the first of the Void Wraith ships were now visible as dark spots against the stars. His expression was sadder than Vera had ever seen it. "I am sorry, my love," he said softly. "I had hoped to live a simple life with you. But it seems that time is over." The first Void Wraith ship touched down in the palace courtyard with no sound at all. It simply appeared, as if reality had bent around it to make space. The ship looked like a piece of living shadow, its surface flowing like dark water. Vera stared at it in terror, her hand gripping Ben's arm. "We need to run," she whispered urgently. "Ben, we need to get to the escape pods." But Ben did not move. He stood perfectly still, watching as more shadow ships materialized around the palace. His calm expression had not changed, even as the impossible vessels surrounded them. "It is too late for running," Ben said softly. "They have found what they were looking for." "What do you mean?" "Ben, you are scaring me." Before Ben could answer, the shadow ships began to open. There were no doors or hatches that Vera could see. Instead, the dark surface simply flowed apart like liquid, creating openings. From these openings came the void wraiths themselves. They moved like smoke given form, gliding across the ground without seeming to touch it. Each one was roughly humanoid in shape, but their bodies were made of absolute darkness filled with tiny points of light that might have been stars. When they moved, reality seemed to bend around them, creating ripples in the air itself. Vera counted at least 20 of the entities emerging from the ships. They moved with purpose, gliding through the palace gardens and heading directly toward the main building. Several palace guards tried to stop them, firing energy weapons that simply passed through the void wraiths without effect. "The throne room," Vera said, understanding suddenly flooding through her. "They are going to the throne room." She grabbed Ben's hand and tried to pull him toward the palace. "We have to warn Kale. We have to help defend the throne room." But Ben gently removed her hand from his arm. "Vera, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What is about to happen will be difficult to understand. But I need you to know that everything I have told you about my feelings for you is true. I love you more than you can possibly imagine." "Ben, what are you talking about?" "We need to move." "I am not who you think I am," Ben continued, his voice still calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "I am much older than I appear. Much older than your entire civilization." Before Vera could respond, they heard Prince Kale's voice echoing from the palace's communication system. "All citizens of Zephyr Prime, this is your prince. Enemy forces have breached the palace. Remain in your homes and await further instructions." Ben started walking toward the palace, moving with the same measured pace he always used. Vera hurried after him, her mind racing with questions she did not know how to ask. They entered the palace through the garden entrance and made their way toward the throne room. The corridors were filled with running guards and panicking servants. But somehow, none of the chaos seemed to touch Ben. He walked through it all as if he existed in a bubble of perfect calm. When they reached the throne room, they found Prince Kale standing behind the crystal throne with Admiral Zex and a dozen of the palace's best guards. The massive doors to the throne room were sealed, but even through the thick crystal barriers, they could see dark shapes moving in the corridor beyond. "Vera!" Prince Kale called when he saw them enter through the side passage. "Thank the stars you are safe. We need to get you to the emergency transport immediately." "What is the situation?" Vera asked, though she could guess the answer from the fear on her brother's face. "The entire palace is surrounded," Admiral Zex reported grimly. "These entities have somehow disabled all our communication systems. We cannot call for backup, and our weapons have no effect on them." As if responding to his words, the sealed doors to the throne room began to glow with dark energy. The crystal barriers that could stop military-grade weapons started to crack and dissolve. "How is that possible?" one of the guards whispered. "Those doors can withstand a direct assault from a battle cruiser." The doors finished dissolving, leaving nothing but an open archway filled with swirling darkness. From this darkness stepped a figure that made everyone in the room take a step backward. It was larger than the other void wraiths, and the points of light within its form burned brighter. When it moved, space itself seemed to ripple around it. Behind this leader came 6 more void wraiths, gliding into the throne room with terrifying grace. The palace guards raised their weapons, but Admiral Zex held up a hand to stop them. Everyone in the room understood that their weapons would be useless. The lead void wraith spoke, and its voice sounded like the collapse of stars. "We are the eternal void. We have come for the guardian. Where is the one who watches?" Prince Kale stepped forward, trying to project authority despite the fear in his voice. "I am Prince Kale of the Zephyrian Empire. This is our sovereign territory. You have no right to make demands here." The void wraith turned its attention to Prince Kael, and the prince immediately staggered as if struck by an invisible force. When the entity spoke again, its voice carried the weight of cosmic ages. We do not speak to children playing at empire building. We seek the guardian. We know it is here. We can sense its presence in this place. Vera looked around the room in confusion. Guardian? What were these creatures talking about? She noticed that Ben had moved to stand directly behind her, but when she turned to look at him, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Ben was no longer looking at the void wraiths with calm acceptance. For the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely sad. And his eyes, those familiar brown eyes, seemed to be glowing with a soft light. I am here, Ben said quietly. His voice was still soft, still gentle, but somehow it carried through the throne room with perfect clarity. Every head turned to look at him, including the terrible gaze of the void wraith leader. Prince Kael stared at Ben in confusion. What are you talking about? Ben, get back. These creatures are dangerous. But the void wraith leader had gone perfectly still. For a long moment, it studied Ben with those burning points of light. When it spoke again, its voice had changed completely. The cosmic arrogance was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Guardian, the entity said. Forgive us. We did not know you had taken residence in this sector. We did not mean to disturb your work. Ben stepped forward, moving past Vera and the others. As he walked, something impossible began to happen. The air around Ben started to shimmer like heat waves. His simple gardening clothes remained the same, but reality itself seemed to bend around him. You have disturbed much more than my work, Ben said, and now his voice carried an authority that made the crystal walls of the throne room ring like bells. You have threatened the people I have come to love. You have brought fear to a place that had known peace. The void wraith leader moved backward, actually retreating from Ben's approach. The other entities behind it began to make sounds that might have been their version of nervous whispers. Guardian, we came seeking you because of the disturbances. The fabric of space has been torn by wars across this galaxy. We thought perhaps you had abandoned your watch. Ben stopped walking when he was directly in front of the lead void wraith. Though he was much smaller than the cosmic entity, somehow he seemed to tower over it. I have never abandoned my watch, Ben said. I have simply chosen to experience it differently. Tell me, when last did you walk among those you claim to protect? When did you last feel joy at the blooming of a simple flower? Vera watched this exchange with growing amazement. The Ben she knew, her gentle husband who spent his days tending gardens, was speaking to cosmic entities as if he had every right to command them. And they were listening. We do not understand, the void wraith leader said. You are one of the eternal guardians. You shaped the cosmos in its youth. Why do you live as a mortal among these lesser beings? Lesser beings? Ben's voice grew cold, and the temperature in the throne room actually dropped several degrees. You call them lesser. Do you see the art they create? The love they share? The sacrifices they make for each other? Tell me, Ancient One, when did you last sacrifice anything for another's happiness? The void wraith seemed to shrink before Ben's words. Around the room, Vera could see the amazement on everyone's faces. Prince Kael was staring at Ben with his mouth open. Admiral Zex had forgotten to maintain his military posture. The guards were looking back and forth between Ben and the cosmic entities as if trying to understand a language they had never heard before. Guardian, the void wraith leader said, we have acted in error. We came seeking you to ask for guidance. The galaxy grows chaotic. New wars begin every cycle. We thought perhaps the Guardians had lost interest in maintaining order. Ben was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle again, but it still carried that cosmic authority. Order cannot be maintained by force alone. It must grow from understanding. From love. From the choice to protect something greater than yourself. These people you call lesser beings understand this better than you do. The Ben began to change. Not physically, but in some way that Vera could not quite explain. He still looked like her husband, but now she could see the vast age in his eyes. She could sense the weight of eons in his presence. This was not the simple gardener she had married. This was something ancient and powerful beyond imagination. You are the eternal guardians, Prince Kael said suddenly, his voice filled with awe. The beings from the old myths. The ones who shaped the galaxy. Ben looked at Prince Kael with a sad smile. Myths have a way of growing in the telling. We did not shape the galaxy. We simply watched over its growth, like gardeners tending a vast field. But the stories say you disappeared, Admiral Zek said. Thousands of years ago, all traces of the Guardians vanished from the galaxy. We did not disappear, Ben replied. We chose to live among the people we protected. To understand them better. To remember why they were worth protecting in the first place. Vera found her voice at last. How many of you are there? How many guardians are living as mortals? Ben looked at her with infinite tenderness. Not many. A few dozen, spread across the galaxy. Most of my kind prefer to remain in their cosmic forms, watching from a distance. But some of us choose to live smaller lives filled with greater meaning. Why humans? Prince Kael asked. If you could choose any form, any species, why did you become human? Because humans understand something that most advanced species have forgotten, Ben replied. They remember that power without love is meaningless. They choose to care for each other even when it brings them no advantage. They find joy in simple things and are willing to sacrifice for others' happiness. The lead Void Wraith spoke again, its voice now filled with something like respect. Guardian, we came seeking your guidance about the chaos in the galaxy. Will you return to your cosmic form and help us restore order? Ben looked around the throne room, his gaze lingering on each face before finally settling on Vera. Order that is imposed from above is not true order. It is merely control. True order comes from beings choosing to do what is right because they love something greater than themselves. He walked back to Vera and took her hands gently in his. I have learned more about the nature of good and evil in 2 years as your husband than in 10,000 years of cosmic observation. Love teaches us things that power never can. But Guardian, the Void Wraith pressed, without your guidance, the wars will continue. Species will destroy each other. Then teach them what I have learned, Ben said firmly. Do not impose order through fear. Instead, help them discover the joy of protecting each other. Show them that cooperation brings greater happiness than conquest. He turned back to address the Void Wraiths directly. You have the power to destroy worlds, but do you have the wisdom to plant a garden? You can cross the galaxy in moments, but can you sit quietly with a friend who is sad? True strength is not in the power to conquer, but in the choice to nurture. The Void Wraith leader was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice had changed once more. The cosmic authority was still there, but now it was tempered with something that might have been humility. We understand, Guardian. We will withdraw from this sector immediately. And we will consider your words about the nature of true order. Good, Ben said. But before you go, I want you to understand something. The Zephyrian Empire, humanity, and all the other species in this galaxy are under my protection. Not because I command you to leave them alone, but because they have earned that protection through their capacity for love and growth. The Void Wraith bowed, actually bent its cosmic form in a gesture of respect. We hear your words, Guardian. We will remember them. One by one, the Void Wraiths began to fade from the throne room, dissolving back into shadow and starlight. The leader was the last to go. Guardian, it said as it began to fade. Will you return to us if the galaxy truly needs your cosmic intervention? Ben considered this question seriously. If the need is truly great, and if there is no other way to protect those I love, then yes. But I hope that day never comes. I much prefer being a gardener." With that, the last void wraith disappeared, leaving the throne room in stunned silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Prince Kael stared at Ben as if seeing him for the first time. Admiral Zex looked like he was trying to understand a concept too large for his mind. The guard stood frozen in place. Finally, Vera spoke. "Ben, is it true? Are you really one of the Eternal Guardians?" Ben looked at her with the same gentle expression she had fallen in love with. "I am exactly who I have always been, Vera. A being who finds joy in simple things and who loves you more than the stars themselves. But you have the power to reshape reality. You could rule the galaxy if you wanted to." "I could," Ben agreed. "But why would I want to? What joy is there in ruling over others? I would much rather spend my days growing flowers with the woman I love." Prince Kael stepped forward, his face still filled with awe. "Guardian, Ben, I owe you an apology. We treated you with disrespect. We mocked your people and called you primitive." Ben waved away the apology with a gentle smile. "You treated me exactly as I appeared to be. That was my choice. And you are not wrong about humans being less advanced than Zephyrians in some ways. But advancement and wisdom are not the same thing." "What happens now?" Vera asked. "Will you stay with us? Will you remain in human form?" Ben took her hands again and looked into her eyes. "That depends on you. Now you know what I truly am. Do you still want a simple gardener for a husband? Or is the truth too much to bear?" Vera looked at this man who was her husband, who was ancient beyond measure, who had just commanded cosmic entities with a word. She thought about the past 2 years, about his gentle hands tending flowers, about the way he listened to her problems with infinite patience, about the love in his eyes when he looked at her. "I fell in love with your heart," she said finally. "Not with your power. If you promise to keep being the man who waters my roses and holds my hand when I am sad, then I do not care if you are older than the stars." Ben's smile was brighter than the sun. "Then I will gladly remain your simple gardener for as long as you will have me." Admiral Zex cleared his throat. "Guardian, Ben, sir, what should we do about the fleet? The survivors, the damaged ships?" "Repair what can be repaired," Ben said. "Care for the wounded. And remember that your strength as an empire comes not from your ability to conquer others, but from your willingness to protect those who need protection." Prince Kael nodded slowly. "We will rebuild. But we will build something better. Something worthy of having a guardian choose to live among us." As the others filed out of the throne room to begin the work of recovery, Vera and Ben walked back through the palace toward their quarters. The emergency alarms had finally stopped, and a peaceful quiet had settled over the palace. "Ben," Vera said as they walked, "will you teach me to tend the gardens properly? I want to understand what brings you such joy in simple things." Ben squeezed her hand gently. "Nothing would make me happier. After all, the best gardens are grown with love." And in the distance, the first ships of the Void Wraith fleet folded space around themselves and disappeared into the cosmic dark, carrying with them a new understanding of the difference between power and wisdom.